So with that, I'll jump into it here and get things rolling. So I know we've got some people that are familiar to us and some people that are not. So I thought I'd start off at the beginning here and just give a little bit of a sense of the organization of our organization and what we've done and how we do things in our world. So for the last about 32 years, we've been helping different organizations with this idea of growth. So helping them to be able to inject some processes and some consulting work into their, or some tools into their businesses, ultimately to help them to be able to grow. And we do that through 4 different areas specifically. So one is around tools. We have a traits assessment tool that you'll get some exposure to today. We have an engagement survey tool and a 360 multi-rater feedback tool that we help businesses with, help to elevate leaders along the way and get them to be able to do things more effectively in their work and leverage these tools to help them to grow their businesses. We do some consulting work, so strategic planning and org design are 2 specific areas where we've got a lot of experience and spend a lot of time with organizations. We do some recruitment as well, so being able to figure out, based on the growth that people are looking at achieving in their businesses, how do we help them to be able to go out and find the right people to fill the seats that they need in order to ensure that their organizations continue to grow. And then we have some training that we do. So we've got some leadership development training that we help organizations with, developing their leaders to be able to assume more responsibility as time goes on, and as well as some training around how personality impacts performance in the workplace, and some work that we do around that, understanding how different people are wired, and based on that, what makes them unique at being able to do different jobs inside of an organization more effectively than others. So as we start rolling through here, I want to give a little sort of a caveat on here, because we're here to talk about communication styles. And there's this interesting thing that we do in strategic planning. So our process involves going in and really sort of dipping the temperature probe into the organization to see what's going on. And we do that through surveys that we send out to different layers within the organization. And what that does is it helps to surface a whole bunch of different things. And we have some people that are challenged by this in a company's strategic growth, and some people that are challenged by that. But when you go and survey that group of individuals, we start to see these themes that come out. So guess what one of the typically top 3 themes is that comes out of every single strategic planning survey that we do when we dip that temperature probe into the organization? One of the top 3 items always ends up being communication. Always. So it's one of those things that, strategically as an organization, that's just something that gets in that organization's way of actually being able to grow. We're not communicating enough. We're not communicating in the right directions. People don't have enough access to information, all of those types of things. And I mention that because I think it's one of those things that doesn't matter whether we do that and we try and work on that over the next few years, that still shows up years down the road, that strategic piece around communication. So it's one of those things that we have to address, we have to spend time on, but it's also one of those things that we're never going to fix. We're never going to say to ourselves, there, we accomplished that. Communication is now at 100%. But what's really key is that we're not just ignoring it, and we're not just leaving it in the background and pushing it aside. Because if you do, that strategic gap becomes a chasm, and now the organization doesn't grow, doesn't function in the way that it needs to. So it's a really imperative thing to spend time on, and to make sure that you've got some language around, and you start to develop these systems and processes inside of your organizations, the knowledge that you ultimately need to be able to take this on and do this on a regular basis, pay attention to it. So I started working with this idea of communication styles going back into high school. And I didn't even really know, I certainly didn't have a focus on where I would end up in my life, but this was just sort of one of the fortuitous things along my journey through the years, working in the sporting goods shop in West Edmonton. And I remember one day the owner of the business kind of blew off a dusty catalog or manual for me, and brought it over and handed it over. And it was this skate company that had gone and put together an idea or a bit of training around communication styles. And they had all these names for the different clients that would be coming in, but you'd have supportive Sally that would that they would have a persona that they would build, and then they would do some teaching around how do you sell to supportive Sally, like what's going to happen when supportive Sally comes in, and what are you going to do to try and make sure that you're getting the right things to them, or thinking about people that were analytical Al that would walk into the shop, and what how are you going to sell to that kind of a person. So I had some really early exposure to this in my life, again maybe fortuitous in the long term, about how this all came together, and actually did some training with our team in that sporting goods shop, and kind of tuned everybody up to this idea of sort of looking at different people. I also had it come back again in a little bit later on in my career, working in a health organization, selling to nurses, selling to healthcare professionals. And I struggled in this area when I first started off, because I'd sort of go and do my rounds. I had a territory that I had to manage. I'd go into these different hospitals, and I'd show up unannounced, because I don't really plan things in my life to any sort of large extent. I like kind of being free and have the ability to jump into all sorts of different things. And when I went into this hospital system, everybody there was always timed, always had all of these plans in the way that they did everything. So Mike's unannounced visit was never looked upon all that well. So I was struggling to try and get these people to buy from me, to be able to move things forward. And then it kind of flashed back a little bit to these Klondike days, and thinking about how different people are wired, and what I was noticing as I was coming to the desks. And so I started coming up with a different strategy, because a lot of nurses are more naturally analytical in style. So I thought, okay, so if we've got some people that are more thoughtful about things, and more cautious about things, and more planful about the way that they do things, I'm going to start thinking about my territory in a different way. And I'm going to start by sending research papers over to those analytical people. So I started sending research papers over to them, so that they had a chance to be able to read them and digest them, and sort of gave a note of, hey, I was thinking about you and wanted to get you, wanted to make sure that I got this across your desk because it's relevant to you. And they'd have some time to read that. And then I'd sort of give them the notice that I'm going to be in town in a month, and would it be okay if I stopped by? And all of a sudden, everything started to change. They were the most receptive people when I showed up to see them, because I had given them information, I had given them things to talk about, I had planned my trips a little bit more effectively, and all of a sudden, my sales trajectory and my work over there just absolutely took off. So I think it's a really key thing that, we run into this, we bump into this on a daily basis with different individuals that we're working with. But if we really start to understand it differently, and can go in with eyes wide open about the way that we're working with people, we can start to make some big strides. So this communication thing is not something that's new. This is something I kind of throw this slide up here about a little bit of the history. So Hippocrates years ago was looking at this and observing different people, and the theory back then was this idea of communication styles, and noticing that there were people with different communication styles, and they had a theory that they pushed together, that this was all about body fluids. So they could actually go and measure the body fluids in people. If you had more sanguine, if you were more phlegmatic about, and more phlegm, then you had some personality characteristics that sort of came with that. And so just sort of interesting to see. I put this up here just because of the history of looking back over time and thinking about communication styles, and this is not something that's new. It's not something that is just coming together here. People have been studying this for years. Fast forward a whole bunch of years and get into more sort of modern times, and I think this is a tool that lots of people are sort of aware of. This was MBTI, Myers-Briggs, that was built back in during World War II, sort of rough timeline, and again sort of used this idea of Jungian theory, and looking at different characteristics that different people had, and trying to be able to assign some sort of knowledge around these behaviors, and give some insights around that. Now, this was built, MBTI was built in a time where we didn't have computers operating in the same sort of way as we did right now. So the whole idea of going through and sort of having a word selection list that would go through, that really was, pick the words that describe you as you're working through this, has changed quite a bit through the years. But what Myers-Briggs did when they were working on it is they really allowed us to be able to choose one or the other. So they'd give us a question that would be something like, are you more introverted? Are you more extroverted? And then allow us to be able to make our selections on where we thought that we were on that. The challenge comes with something like this, that when we actually look at this either or thing, it's kind of like breaking down the population into short or tall. And when we're using that to describe people, that's not really a very good measurement tool, short or tall, because frankly, none of us are really one or the other of those unless we're more extreme. So this whole idea of being able to come up with a scale that's more useful to be able to understand, okay, well, people probably aren't one or the other. They're probably a lot of the population is going to be some sort of combination of that. So again, if you think about the population, we have some people that are very short and there are fewer of them. We have some people that are very tall and there are fewer of them. And we have this mass sort of congregation of people that are of average height. So what we've done, what some other instruments have done out there, is really try to take this idea about understanding people, getting to greater depths with them, and using an idea of scale. So with traits, what we've gone and done is we've taken a look at 7 different characteristics, and we've used this information to be able to throw everybody up on a scale. Again, everybody fits somewhere on this scale, and most people congregate more towards the middle. So this is just one of our scales here, looking at sociability, which is one of the critical scales that we use in understanding communication styles. And when we use this, we're able to see, okay, well, where does somebody actually fit on this scale? And then the more accurately that we can measure this, the more consistently we can see these characteristics and coming up with people that are just like that. So whenever I look at this scale, I always give the example of Robin Williams probably being up around that +4, +5. Most people sort of have some sort of knowledge of Robin as they've seen him through the years in different movies and everything that he's had. And it's this interesting thing that happens when you have somebody that's so high on sociability. One, he loves the attention on him, loves the spotlight on him. That's where he was at his best. 2, not very analytical. What do I mean by that? Well, when Robin used to get a script, the stories would go that he would kind of take a look at the script and not necessarily read the words, but sort of get the idea of what was going on in this scene, and then he'd ad-lib. So it was a very tough thing to actually work with Robin, because you were always having to deal with whichever direction he turned and how he was making the scene come together. But when he was doing Good Morning Vietnam, the story goes that he basically said, hit record, and he ad-libbed the radio scene. That was a 1-day recording. He ad-libbed for 8.5 hours, which is an intensity that most of us in the world could never, ever do. So again, most people fitting closer to the middle, but this is just a key scale in being able to understand how do they interact with the world, and to what degree, how strong is that characteristic in coming out with them. So the further that a characteristic moves over to the left-hand side, the more analytical somebody's going to be. So what we try to do with this as we're looking at this is we're really trying to understand, okay, where does somebody fit on this scale? And it's this idea of almost like if we took everybody in the world and we lined them up from least social on one side to most social on the other. Again, we're going to see all of these people, each one maybe a little bit more, a little bit less social as you look across the scale, mass congregation towards the middle. But then we're going to be able to say, when we take this group of people that are somewhere at around a +1 on sociability, we see some real strong consistencies in terms of the way that they show up, the way that they communicate, how much information they need ahead of time. Do we need to give them the full script on something, or can they ad-lib as they're going along? Or do we actually see that change when we get to somebody that's in the grouping around that +2? What happens when we have somebody that's a -2 that's in the room? What sort of comes in there? How much information do we have to give them? And then as we start to build these consistencies in terms of the way that we're looking at people, now we can start to see and start to predict how those people are going to show up and how to ultimately work with those people more effectively as time goes on. So when we're looking at something like communication styles, what we're doing is we're taking 2 different scales, assertiveness being one of those scales, and sociability being the other side of the scale, and we're putting those up on an axis. So the middle part of each of those scales is going to be right in the middle here. And the more extreme somebody moves on the assertiveness scale or on the sociability scale, the more that those characteristics or those communication styles actually start to show up. So when we take a look at somebody that's lower on sociability and higher on assertiveness, there we have drivers. Very short, very to the point, more controlling in the words that they use, more results focused in terms of the way that they interact, and tend to drive things in a direction. So we know when we're talking with a driver because we sort of feel the impact of those communications as they're coming at us, and they tend to be more telling as opposed to selling in the way that they come across. Then we have people that are high on assertiveness and and high on sociability. These would be the expressives of the world. High and assertive, I'm good, I'm more risk-oriented, I'm willing to sort of step out and take on an initiative, and higher on sociability. I love being in places where I can do a whole bunch of chatting, whole bunch of talking. I do my best thinking when I'm thinking out loud, as an example. So get me into a room and let's do some brainstorming. That's where I'm at my best. Then we have higher sociability and lower assertiveness. So these would be people that like being part of a group, don't want to direct that group. They want to support that group. So you think about different styles or different roles that exist out there in the world, maybe even different people that you have in your life, maybe even you. The supportives tend to be the glue on the team, bringing people together, checking in to see how the team is doing, being of service to different individuals that are coming into the organization. Inside sales, supportives show up in inside sales a lot of the time because they want to be able to help people. HR draws a lot of supportive individuals naturally inside of that position that need to help people, and that natural motivation for doing that. And then we have lower sociability and lower assertiveness analyticals. So I talked earlier about nurses and running into a lot of nurses through the years, and they tended to be lower on assertiveness and lower on sociability, more interested in more of a technical aptitude that they would tend to bring to things, and more of an orientation to following a certain rhythm about the way that they were taking things on, cataloging or taking notes along the way as they were doing their checkups with all of the different patients on the ward. Now that doesn't mean that all nurses are analytical. I knew one of the head nurses for what is now Alberta Health Services, and she was an expressive. But she's doing a job that's very, very different than nursing. She had a nursing background, but a job that's very, very different than nursing. Her motivations pulled her into a different area, into a different place. So when we understand all of these different communication styles, now we start to understand how to better interact with people. And so we can start to say, okay, when I'm coming and working with a driver, I'm going to need to make sure that I've got all of my thinking done ahead of time. And I've got some proof to back up what it is that I'm trying to present to that person. And I get to the point very quickly with them. I better come prepared. When I swing by the Expressives office, they're happy to have a chat. Happy to have that interruption, happy to kind of yak things out a little bit, and if anything, I better be checking up on them a little bit with some of the things that I asked them to do yesterday, because they tend to walk away from meetings not with a big plan, just moving on to the next conversation, he said with a smile. So the more that we understand about these communication styles, the more that we can start to figure out what are the strategies that I can use to work more effectively with each and every one of the people that surround me, whether that's clients, whether that's direct reports, whether that's peers that I'm working with on a regular basis. What can I do to help that along? So as I mentioned, we've got a session coming up here starting on April 22nd. I've got a couple more details along the way. And what we're going to do inside of this session, what we're going to learn about, we're going to take a look at the two scales. We're going to learn a little bit more about what each of those mean and where people show up on those scales in the world, where you show up on those scales. And then we're going to do some work around style identification. So most of you don't get to walk around with a tool like this everywhere you go and asking everybody that you meet to go through the survey so that you can figure out their communication style. So what are some cues that we can use based on body language, based on words that you hear coming out of people's mouths? What are some cues that we could start to look for that help with actually being able to identify a style without having to ask them to go through the assessment? We're going to talk about some things around how to demotivate the different styles. Not because we intentionally want to go and demotivate people, but over and over and over again, I hear these stories about, oh shoot, Mike, it was because of this exercise that I realized how demotivating I was being to the person that was on the other side of the desk from me. Opened up some eyes on that. So what do I have to do to, again, be more motivating in that person's life? We talk about tension, because a certain degree of tension is a good thing to have. So what happens when we have the right degree of that? What happens when all of a sudden that starts to go off the rails a little bit and starts to become a little bit more grating? So some great stories that come out of that exercise to really be able to understand when those tensions start to come up and what we need to do about them. Lastly, how do we show adaptability? So if I'm going to really make the effort to be able to try and improve my communication style, then I'm really wanting to go in there and try and understand what do I have to do to adapt, to adjust, to try and make this relationship, this communication work more effectively with the person that's next to me. So we've got lots of different exercises that we have throughout this session. We've got some breakout rooms that we do as well. So this always works really, really well in getting to know a few new people inside of these sessions, and really sort of talking through some of the ideas that we have around this and all of your experiences around this. So it's a really good session to build the network and learn some things from some different styles. We may be a little bit intentional about the way that we break up our groups, so that we get to start to see how those different styles start to interact with each other, so you get sort of a live view of that as it comes in. We hope you walk away from this session with a couple of key things that are ultimately going to come from this, really being able to have different strategies for different employees. You're going to walk away with that. Some different strategies that we can use so that we can actually make some changes in how we're interacting with people. Really understanding our unique communication style, our strengths and challenges, what kind of gets in our way, what are we blind to sometimes, and opening up our eyes to that. So this whole idea of self-awareness, and then identify individual staff potential and inspire their growth. Again, using this style identification, how do we see how different individuals are again sort of focused in the work that they're doing, what they're motivated to do, and how can we actually go and encourage that as opposed to trying to shut that off. And then lastly, clear communication, boosting trust, improving team morale, being able to have a model that you can walk away with to start to apply inside of your organizations and really start to make some improvements in this idea of communication styles. So some of the workshop details for you here in how this is working. So we've got 3 sessions. We start on April 22nd. 3 sessions that we do each week, just happens 1 week after the next as you cascade your way down. An hour and a half for each one of these sessions. So again, we'll do a little bit of teaching on a concept or on an idea, give you some opportunity to be able to go and talk some of that out and work some of that out in your groups, pull everybody back together again for a good discussion, and then again sort of build on that as we go through the weeks. So ultimately, the fee for this is $350. We've got a special for those that are attending this webinar that if you register in the next 48 hours, then we'll have a reduced price of $325. And if you refer a friend into this session, then we'll do both of you for $300. And Laura will have all the details on how to have that come together, how to make that work. And we've got a QR code here for you to get some more information about the session. But we love filling these classes. They're a lot of fun to do. The discussions that happen in the breakout rooms are absolutely fantastic. And so we would encourage you to sign up for this. It's a good experience, and we'll give you some things that you can take back to your organizations to ultimately be able to make some steps forward on this whole idea of communication. Going back to that idea off the start, it always is one of the key strategic issues that comes up within our strategic surveys, communication. And so trying to understand, if we're trying to communicate a new vision or a new strategic plan to our organization, what are the different ways that we need to do that? What are the different styles that we need to keep into consideration? And make sure that our messages are going to contain some things that are going to resonate with each one of those styles. So again, just to wrap this up, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. We've got a good, exciting session coming up here in a few weeks, and would love to see all of you there. Thanks for making your time today, giving us your time, and I hope it's a fine sunny day where you are, and enjoy it. Thanks, everyone.